Welcome to Le Weekend, your essential roundup of French news on culture, business, the economy, and current affairs. We bring you a convenient way to catch up on the stories from the past week in France, plus an additional focus feature blending reportage and cultural context. You'll find a seamless recap of the week's most important headlines without losing any content from our previous daily format, perfect for those who want to catch up in just one episode. Le Weekend is designed to keep you informed and engaged with a lighter touch at the end. Let's dive in.
These are the headlines on Monday, May 4th. French hard-left politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon, leader of La France Insoumise political party, announced he will stand in next year's presidential election, as reported by RFI. €1 meals are now available for all students of higher education in France. Since Monday, all students have access to €1 meals, approximately $1.20, in all university restaurants. Until then, only scholarship recipients were eligible, as reported by France Info. The 2026 Cannes Film Festival unveiled its jury. Hollywood star Demi Moore, Oscar-winning Chinese director Chloe Zhao, Nomadland and Hamlet, and Swedish actor Stellan Skarsgård are part of the jury, which will be chaired by South Korean filmmaker Park Chan-wook, as reported by Le Parisien. The headlines on Tuesday, May 5th. Emmanuel Moulin is the proposed candidate for the role of governor of Banque de France. President Macron wants to appoint the former Secretary General of the Élysée to replace François Villeroy de Galhau as head of the central bank, as reported by Le Figaro. More about this in our focus story. Online marketplace Rakuten France is looking for a buyer at risk of shutting down if the search fails, potentially affecting 180 jobs. The subsidiary of the Japanese e-commerce giant said the project comes in the context of declining business over the past decade, despite ongoing efforts and investments in France, as reported by Le Figaro. Yoko Ono-John Lemon's legal dispute turned into marketing gold for a Breton craft brewer. A small craft brewery in western France has found an unexpected silver lining after a legal clash, as they were asked by Yoko Ono to stop producing its John Lemon beer, a playful nod to her late husband, John Lennon, which brought an unexpected degree of publicity. The brewery was granted permission to continue selling its remaining stock of around 5,000 bottles until July 1st, turning a potential setback into a sellout success, as reported by RFI. The headlines on Wednesday, May 6th. Amazon is ramping up its French operations. The e-commerce giant will invest more than $15 billion in France over the next 3 years and create more than 7,000 permanent jobs as it expands its logistics network, cloud services, and artificial intelligence operations, as reported by RFI. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said the government will not deviate from its course and confirmed the 3% deficit target for 2029. In a letter to the head of the French Business Confederation, MEDEF, Lecornu said the target holds despite the threat of an economic crisis due to soaring fuel prices, as reported by Les Echos. Film production and distribution company Pathé and Vendôme Pictures joined forces to produce English-language films. Around 10 films are currently in development under the Emotion Pictures banner. The first co-productions will be released starting next year, as reported by Le Figaro. The headlines on Thursday, May 7th. France is repositioning its aircraft carrier for possible mission in the Strait of Hormuz. France is moving its aircraft carrier strike group towards the Red Sea as preparations gather pace for a possible French-British maritime security mission in the area, as reported by RFI. Scores were arrested in Paris after Paris Saint-Germain reached the Champions League final. Police arrested 127 people, while 11 people were injured, including one seriously, during incidents in the French capital after the football match, as reported by Le Monde. Elon Musk is the subject of a French judicial investigation concerning his social network X. This new legal development comes as the billionaire failed to respond to a summons from the Paris prosecutor's office for a voluntary interview on April 20th. Specialized officers from the National Cyber Unit have been investigating numerous alleged abuses of the social network and its CEO since the summer of 2025, as reported by Le Monde. The headlines on Friday, May 8th. France's trade deficit widened to 6.9 billion euros in March. According to customs officials, the trade deficit widened by 1.4 billion euros, mainly due to rising energy prices linked to the war in the Middle East, as reported by Le Figaro. President Emmanuel Macron is set to begin his African tour on Saturday, May 9th, with a summit in Kenya focused on investments, as reported by France 24. The 5 French nationals aboard the ship Hondius, expected in France this Sunday, May 10th, and considered high-risk contact cases, will have to undergo a quarantine to prevent the spread of the hantavirus. The Ministry of Health announced that there will be a mandatory 72-hour hospital stay, followed by 45 days of home isolation, with appropriate monitoring in place, as reported by Le Parisien. You are listening to Le Weekend. And now that you're all caught up with the news from the past week, it's time for our focus story. Today we look at why a bank founded by Napoleon made the news this week. On May 5th, the Élysée Palace quietly dropped a name, Emmanuel Moulin. Until days earlier, the Secretary General of the Presidency, President Macron's closest aide, was being proposed as the next governor of the Banque de France. The announcement, published on the official Élysée website, was brief, but the reaction was anything but. Critics pointed out immediately that Moulin had, just a week before, been sitting at the very apex of presidential power. A 57-year-old former Director General of the French Treasury, he had also served as Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Gabriel Attal and as an economic advisor to President Sarkozy. His career, in other words, is the definition of haute fonction publique, that rarefied world where ENA graduates orbit seamlessly between the Trésor, the Élysée, and the grand institutions. The nomination now faces a parliamentary vetting process. Both the finance committees of the National Assembly and the Senate must scrutinize it and can exercise a veto by 3/5 majority. The controversy comes because of the nature of Banque de France as an institution. Its entire architecture, both legal and historical, is built on independence. And to understand why this carries such weight, we have to go back more than 2 centuries to the first consul with a particular talent for both war and financial engineering. In January 1800, the Banque de France was founded by a consortium of private bankers at the instigation of Napoleon Bonaparte, then first consul. France was financially exhausted. The revolution had been catastrophic for public finances. The assignat, the paper currency backed by confiscated church lands, had collapsed. Napoleon needed an institution that could restore credibility to French money and provide the government with a reliable source of credit, crucially one that could also help finance wars. The bank listed Napoleon himself, members of his family, and several leading personalities among its founding shareholders. It was a public-private hybrid, founded mainly with private capital, but with the government claiming influence through the appointment of its governor and 2 deputy governors. In 1803, it obtained the privilege of issuing banknotes for Paris, the first step towards the monopoly on note issuance it would eventually hold across all of France. The formula worked. Confidence in French finance was restored, and almost by accident, Napoleon had created a model. Central banks, as we now know them, spread across Europe partly in the wake of French expansion, as occupied territories found themselves in need of similar stabilizing institutions. If there is one thing that makes Banque de France genuinely cinematic, is what lies 27 meters below its elegant headquarters on the Rue Croix de Petit Champ in central Paris. The souterrain, literally the underground, is one of the great treasure rooms of the modern world. Excavated between 1924 and 1927 by removing 60,000 cubic meters of rocky material, the vault was built by over 1,200 workers using 10,000 tons of steel and 20,000 tons of cement. It holds approximately 2,400 tons of gold, making France the 4th largest official gold reserve holder in the world, behind the United States, Germany, and Italy. The reserves are currently valued at over 125 billion euros, equivalent to around 147.5 billion US dollars. Perhaps the vault's most gripping story came in 1940. As German forces swept through northern France and the Maginot Line crumbled, Banque de France undertook one of history's most extraordinary logistical operations, moving 2,500 tons of gold out of Paris before the Nazis could seize it. Ships, trains, trucks, and aircraft were all pressed into service. Shipments went to Casablanca, to Halifax in Canada, to Martinique in the Caribbean. One French cruiser, the Émile Bertin, was pursued across the Atlantic by 3 British ships after France's capitulation made it a potential enemy asset. Some of the gold eventually traveled 560 miles inland by train in what is now known as Mali to put it out of reach. When 4 Nazi officers arrived at the Banque de France in June 1940 expecting to seize a legendary hoard, the vault was largely empty. They had come for a fortune and found just empty shelves. A coda to that story came as recently as earlier this year. Between July 2025 and January 2026, Banque de France quietly repatriated the final 129 tons of gold still stored at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, completing a decades-long program to consolidate all of France's reserves under the souterrain. The swap of old non-standardized bars for new European standard gold generated a capital gain of 13 billion euros, turning a net loss of 7.7 billion in 2024 into a net profit of 8.1 billion for the 2025 financial year. For most of its history, the Banque de France was the master of French monetary policy, setting interest rates, controlling the money supply, defending the franc. But it operated under the direct influence of the government. Governors were political appointees, and the state leaned heavily on the institution, especially in times of crisis. That fundamentally changed in 1993. Under the new law, the Banque de France gained formal independence with a monetary policy council charged with setting policy without seeking or accepting instructions from the government or any other body. It was a landmark moment and a necessary one as France prepared for the single European currency. In 1999, Banque de France joined the Eurosystem, the network of national central banks coordinated by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. Banque de France holds a roughly 20% stake in the ECB. Its governor sits on the ECB Governing Council, where decisions on Eurozone interest rates are taken collectively. French monetary policy, in other words, is now a joint European enterprise, and the independence of each national central bank is a cornerstone of the entire architecture. What surprises some people about the Banque de France is that it's not a remote institution of monetary grandeur. It operates in the daily financial lives of French citizens in ways that are concrete. For example, the Livret A. It is a tax-free savings account held by tens of millions of French people, has its interest rate set twice a year by the finance minister, but only after the governor of Banque de France formally recommends a rate. Following the governor's recommendation, the Livret A rate was cut to 1.5% in February, down from 1.7% before, reflecting falling inflation. The rate on the more generous Livret d'épargne populaire, reserved for lower-income savers, was held at 2.5%, above the formula-based calculation, at the governor's explicit urging, with the institution noting that this account represents genuine popular savings. Banque de France also runs France's national over-indebtedness service. When a household is drowning in debt, unable to pay rent, credit card bills, utilities, it can file a dossier de surendettement with its local Banque de France branch. The Commission examines the case, negotiates with creditors, and, if necessary, arranges partial or total debt write-off. In 2025, for example, around 148,000 such files were submitted. This represented a rise of 9.8% over the previous year, a figure that speaks about the pressures on French household finances. This brings us back to the candidate, Emmanuel Moulin. His backers argue that his career, spanning the Treasury, Élysée, Eurotunnel, Mediobanca, and the Paris Club, amounts to exactly the kind of broad financial and institutional experience the role demands. The Treasury route, in particular, has been the traditional pipeline for Banque de France governors. His predecessor, François Villeroy de Galhau, who announced his early departure in February 2026 to lead a children's charity, was himself a former senior finance ministry official. But critics see something different. A president in the final stretch of his second term, unable to stand for re-election, placing a man from his own inner sanctum in charge of one of France's most powerful institutions, with a mandate that, if confirmed, would run until June 2032, stretching well into the next presidential term. The optics are uncomfortable. The institution, whose entirely modern identity rests on being free from political instruction, would be led by a man who, just days before his nomination, was the president's chief gatekeeper. Whether Moulin himself would prove fiercely independent in practice, as some former political appointees to central banking roles have done, is a question that cannot be answered in advance. What can be said is that the independence of Banque de France is the legal and moral foundation on which it was rebuilt in 1993 and the condition of its continued membership of a euro system that does not tolerate political interference. Napoleon understood that a nation's credibility depends on its institutions being trusted. He built Banque de France for exactly that reason. The question now before the French Parliament is whether, more than 2 centuries later, France is still sensitive to that instinct.
Thank you for listening to Le Weekend, your one-stop destination for the main headlines in France. Catch our weekly roundup every weekend wherever you get your podcasts. Stay informed.